Merry met, virtual traveller, and welcome to Stories from Law, a podcast that invites you to rewild yourself through story by exploring nature, folklore, and the stories it inspires. My name is Dawn Nelson, and I'm an author, consultant, and professional storyteller. In episode 7, and the last episode ever of Stories from Law, we are staying at home with the familiar domestic beasts of the monk's bestiary. My main reference for this episode is Richard Barber's translation of the MS Bodley 764 Bestiary, so grab yourself a cuppa as we walk down the lane to the farm. Long have we relied on the familiar beasts of the farmyards to clothe us, provide us with bones for jewellery and hand tools, sustain us with life-giving milk, cheese, butter and yoghurt, and feed us high-protein meat. Without them, and their sacrifice, it could be said that we would not be the species we are today. So what are the observations of the scribes in the scriptorium when it came to the animals they lived beside? Let's start with the cow, which comes under the headings bullock, ox, cow and calf in the bestiary that I'm looking at. It starts off by noting that bulls from India are often gold and as swift as birds, and they can open their mouths as wide as their heads, turn their horns at will, and as such arrows will just bounce off them. The cow of the UK does not get this treatment. It's almost dismissed. So what does the cow represent? Well, it doesn't really give much of a description of the cows that we would have farmed with here in the UK. However, it does give a good amount from the Bible and about how sometimes cows are good and sometimes they're evil, but calves are always innocent. It quotes a section from the Bible, Isaiah 7 verse 21 to 22. The verse goes, "In that day a person will keep alive a young cow and 2 goats, and because of the abundance of the milk they give, there will be curds to eat. All who remain in the land will eat curds and honey." Sounds rather blissful, doesn't it? And essentially, the cow, and goats of course, are at the centre of this blissful imagery. If we take a brief look, and I mean brief look, at cows in the Anglo-Saxon period, we see that they were too central basically to dairy production. They had a particular way of describing milk that was straight out of the cow, which I just think is rather lovely, and the word is cwem, which is cow or milk, basically. Cows were so important during this period of time that Vaynol described cattle, and Vaynol also means fee. It's where we get the word fee from. It was pretty much how they paid each other for their services. In cows. I'm sure we can all be thankful that's not how we pay for services these days. My garden is really quite small and could probably only hold maybe 1 small cow, so it wouldn't be much use as a method of payment. Let's move on to goats. And these little anecdotes from the bestiary come under the headings goat, wild goat and he-goat, although he-goat could also refer to a ram, a male sheep. It's not very clear because it definitely says he-goat, which would suggest that that refers to goats. However, this entry comes after the section on sheep. And anyway, enough rambling from me. The Greeks apparently called goats gazelles, according to the bestiary. I'm not sure about that, but they called them gazelles apparently because of their keen sight. Goats were able to tell whether you're a hunter or a traveller from miles away, and it's fair to say that most prey animals will be able to do this. It's instinctual. You only need to watch deer to see that they can do this. Where I sit in the study to work, I can see across into a field where the deer often bring their young or come and graze in the meadow, and they know I'm there because as soon as I turn to watch them, they raise their head and they look straight at me. They know. So I don't know that this is all that unique to goats, but if you know better, please do let me know. Apparently, if the wild goat is wounded, then it will seek out the Disney plant. This is a plant that is native to Crete, and it has been used in the past to flavour wine, as decorations, grown in the gardens, and it's described as being a medicinal panacea, as well as an aphrodisiac, but there's plenty more of those in this episode. So You don't need to go to Crete for the dittany. I've found references to it being used for digestive disorders or respiratory issues, even skin infections, wounds and cuts, which is possibly where this association with the goat comes. They probably just observed that the goat eats it. However, you can have allergic reactions to dittany and a stomach upset, as you can with most of these things. There are good sides and bad sides. So yes, it appears that the wild goat discovered that dittany would heal wounds. And it is here that we come to the he-goat. As I said before, this entry comes just after the sheep. So the he-goat is described as being stubborn and lascivious. It's said to have lusty eyes, which there's no other way of describing it. It gives you the side eye with, basically. That's how they describe it. Apparently, these goats are so hot with lust that its blood will dissolve diamonds. That's quite a claim. And as such, probably because of the lusty proclivities, this goat is associated with the devil who is hairy and horny. Sheep is the next entry I'd like to have a look at, and these little anecdotes come under sheep, whether lamb or kid. They are described, quite correctly, as being soft and with wool all over their bodies and defenceless and peaceful. I'd go with all of those things for sheep. They also note that men of old made offerings of sheep in the past. They do note that at the beginning of winter they eat vociferously as they are anxious to stuff themselves with food. These are direct quotes from the Bestiary. The wethers are referring to the rams that are used for mating. There is some speculation about the name within the Bestiary, and the monks who wrote this one argue that the name refers to the worms that are in the wether's head that clearly irritate it as they are butting heads all the time. I guess that's one way of looking at it. They also suggest that wethers are like the apostles because they have powerful foreheads and always overthrow whatever they strike. The lamb, of course, is directly linked with the Lamb of God. Within the Bestiary, they are at great pains to state how unique it is that the lamb can recognise its mother better than any other animal simply by the bleats that they make, and vice versa. They talk at length about how a female sheep can find its lambs in the middle of thousands of other sheep. I have observed this to be true, and it's always amazed me because to us, of course, they all sound the same. It goes on to say that if you obey the teachings of the church, well then you too can be a lamb. Next up, it's pigs, and we have entries under sow and boar. Well, I don't think any of you are surprised when I say that these entries suggest that the pig is a filthy beast, sucks up filth and wallows in it. Oh, and smears itself with it. They are sinners and they are unclean. There is no doubt about this when you are reading these entries. They've got a really bad reputation in the Bible and in the Bestiaries. A lot of it is not repeatable, unfortunately, as it's thoroughly unpleasant and highly discriminatory. I'm not going to go too much in depth with it because I don't really want to proliferate those views. But that's when they're talking about the sow. If you turn to the page where they're talking about the boar, well, then you'll find a regal being associated with kings representing fierce rulers, and they're described as wild and unruly, but never gluttonous sinners. Yet again, women, or the female of the species, gets a bad deal in this. Finally, let's have a look at the horse. The horse gets probably one of the biggest entries in the Bestiary that I have read to date, and it is, in the main, correct. So they state that the hooves dig out the earth like no others. I'm not absolutely sure that that's true. You can tell a horse from any other animal when it's been walking along a bridle path, but that is in the main because of its hooves. It doesn't dig up the path any more or less than any other animal. I've seen badgers dig up the path in a much more effective manner, to be honest. They're lively, yep, I'll give them that. And if a trumpet is played, well, this encourages them to fight and go into battle. I'm not sure whether that's just maybe the way they're trained. And human voices apparently urge them to race. There are indeed some horses which respond to these sorts of noises, whether they are flight responses or actually that they do want to race is a matter that remains great debate to this day. They do note that there is a very strong bond between humans and horses. The Bestiary profess the opinion that horses can recognise their owners and will weep for them if they die. I've definitely seen a horse grieving. But this is where it starts to get a bit odd. If you cut the mane of a mare, apparently it will no longer wish to mate. That kind of goes back to cutting the hair of women and femininity and all of that symbolism. That's an entire episode in itself, so let's not go there. But they did note something very interesting. So in the Bestiary, it says that when a mare is pregnant, they have a growth on their forehead, and this growth is called hypomenes. Now, I looked into this because I was curious, because I've never seen this on a horse, but it's not actually a growth on the forehead. It is, in fact, in the amniotic fluid of the pregnant horse. So perhaps what they meant was it can sometimes appear on the forehead of the foal when it's born, and it just kind of got lost in translation. I don't know. Hypomenes is like a browny dark green jelly. It's about the size of a fist. They did consider it to be a love charm, and this is what it is described as in the Bestiary. It was the Greeks that first noted it, and it was the Greeks that called it hypomenes. It's a very Greek word, and it means horse madness. So hippo as in horse and manes as in madness. So it was the Greeks that first noticed it. They actually dried out this gelatinous mass and they used it as an aphrodisiac. I'm not sure I want to do that, but, each to their own. The Bestiary goes on to continue this association with desire in the horse by saying that the deeper they put their nostrils in the water when drinking, the hotter their desire. So it's clear from this entry that the horses are well respected, they have a strong bond with their owners, and there's a lot of power and sexuality within these beings. Overall, though, the theme for cows and goats and sheep is that they represent God and Christ in their sacrifices, innocence and sight. The pigs are sinners and the oxen are preachers ploughing the fields. Many of the breeds that we used to rely on hundreds of years ago have now become what is known as rare breeds, and there are still people working towards keeping these breeds going. Perhaps they were proved not to have been as productive as our more modern breeds. They basically didn't make us as much money. But the Rare Breeds Survival Trust has plenty of information on these breeds if you would like to take a closer look. What I would like to do is speak the names of those that we have relied on since we started farming in the Neolithic, and you can join me at the end to speak those names. I'll put a list of them in the show notes. That brings us to the story for this episode. And this is one of my favourite stories, as it's one that I've shared before, but I couldn't resist sharing it again, as it's just perfect for this episode. So here it is, The Fairy Cows of Wales. A long time ago, in the rolling green countryside of Wales, there lived a farmer. He was a dairy farmer and he did okay. He had a herd of fine belted cattle, black face, black hinds and a thick white belt across their middle. They were his pride and joy. He'd rise early to milk them every morning, find them the greenest, freshest, dewiest pastures to graze in, and you could taste it in their milk. He'd spend the day making milk and butter to sell to the locals, and they all agreed it was the best butter in the village. One day, the farmer took the cattle up to a field where he knew there was a lake. It was further than he usually drove them, but he wanted to find them the finest grass he could. He knew this place had it. It was a place he'd played in as a child, sitting in the boughs of the oak tree that stood in the middle of the field and watching the swallows flit above the long grass, snapping at the bugs. He'd heard tell the meadow was a place for fairies, and that's why the villagers did not take their own livestock there. But, well, he wasn't so sure. He'd never met one there. Mind, he had a vague recollection of a beautiful woman who was sometimes there at the same time as he was, sat in the oak tree. But he couldn't properly place that memory. Perhaps he'd put it there himself, a figment of his childish imagination. It was a grey, misty day as he approached the meadow. A curtain of water droplets hugged the land. The grass would be rich and succulent and perfect for his belted beauties. The mist would rise over the day, and the early April sun would burn through it. He could eat his lunch under the oak tree and make a bit of a holiday of it, watching his cattle rather than slaving away at the churn. That could wait until tomorrow. The sun did indeed burn through the mist, lighting it up, and in time he could see across the meadow and make out the bulrushes around the edge of the lake. Lunchtime arrived, and he sat with his bread, cheese and small ale beneath the oak that he had clambered over as a child. As he sat, he watched his cows chewing the cud and scanned the field. Nope, no fairies. But wait a minute. What was that? The lake had ripples upon it, radiating out from the middle to the edges, lapping against the bulrushes. It was as if the whole thing was shuddering. Then, from beneath the water emerged a woman, as light as the mist, with a corona that shone like the dew, and her long green robes that dressed her graceful body had not a drop of water upon them, despite where she had just come from. There was a slight smile on her lips as she turned to face the lake again and called,
"Come, my cows of the deep meadow lake, come roam the lush green fields. Eat your fill of the earth's bounty, then return to a world concealed."
Out of the lake came the most magnificent white cows the farmer had ever seen. Clean white horns and soft black snouts, these cows were a thing of beauty. He gazed upon them, jaw hanging, bread halfway between his lunch tin and his mouth. Never before. But wait. Now he looked. Perhaps this was the woman he thought he had remembered seeing. He placed his bread back in the tin, brushed the crumbs from his shirt, and went to stand. The fairy woman gave an almost imperceptible shake of the head, but in an instant he knew she did not wish to talk with any human. He rested his back against the tree once more and was content to watch the ethereal scene unfold as the shining white cattle spread out across the field amongst his now, frankly, dowdy-looking cows. He'd heard of fairy cattle, but never did he think they existed. He felt sure they'd been a marketing gimmick other farmers used to try and sell their milk, the power of positive affirmation in the eyes of the consumer. He never believed it. As he watched, he saw the fairy cows move with ease across the land, beautiful big black eyes, showing none of the inherited fear found in standard domestic cattle. He felt sure their milk would taste as good as the legends said. A fairy cow would make him his fortune. But, well, he wasn't an idiot. He'd heard plenty of stories about fairies and their wrath, and he wasn't going to risk stealing one. The day wore on, and soon it was time to return to the farmstead. The fairy woman called back her cows with the same song, and before returning home, the farmer watched the cows melt back into the lake, into their world concealed. Over the next few months, the farmer became obsessed with the cattle he had seen. He dreamt of them. He made plans on how he would sell his fairy cow milk, and, well, he visited the field many times. He no longer had time to make the butter and yoghurt for the villagers that they so wanted, and his business started to fail, but he did not care. He had to see those magical beings again. And he did. At least 3 times a month the fairy cows would graze in that meadow, with his own belted ones, but never did the fairy of the lake allow him to bargain for a cow or even approach her. Instead, he was held transfixed. One day, after a day in the meadow with the fairy cows, he was setting off to return to the farm with a well-fed, belted herd, when he noticed a pure white cow was following his herd. Joy of joys, a fairy cow had been left behind, or had it been gifted? He couldn't be sure, but, well, he didn't care. Once back at the farm, he didn't even wait until the morning to milk that fairy cow. No, he just had to know if the legend was true. And it was. This was surely the most delicious milk he had ever tried. He bottled it up and labelled it fairy cow milk. His regular customers had long gone elsewhere, thinking the farmer had lost his mind to whatever otherworldly beings roamed that meadow. And so the next day the farmer took the milk around to the houses and gave it away, because he knew as soon as they tasted it, they would want more, and next time they would pay. And they did. Over the years, the cow produced more milk than any other cow he owned. The butter from its milk was rich and fluffy, and the yoghurt thick and creamy. In time, the fairy cow had a calf, and so on, until he had a herd of fairy cows. In fact, he slaughtered his own belted cows to make way for them, because he got more for the belted cow meat than he got for their milk. The first fairy cow never seemed to age. In fact, she got plumper and her coat glossier the longer she stayed at the farm. And then the farmer got to thinking, what if the fairy cow meat tasted much better than any other beef? The thought played on his mind for months before he finally made up his mind. He had plenty of fairy cows now. Killing one would surely not be a problem. The day of the slaughter was set. The villagers were just as keen as he to see what the fairy cow tasted like, and they lined up to await their pound of flesh. Of course, there were some who watched and muttered about fairy curses and not messing with what you don't understand, but the majority of them, well, they were just thinking about their bellies. As the farmer raised his gun to kill the cow, a chill whipped through the barn. The fairy cow herd in the field lowed, and the condemned cow looked into the eyes of the farmer. But it had no fear.
Come, white cows of the deep meadow lake, come roam the lush green fields.
The song came on the breeze from far away. The fairy cow moved forward towards the farmer, who found he couldn't move an inch. His muscles twitched, but he could not pull the trigger. The cow walked right past him, through the crowd of villagers, and out into the field where the other cattle waited. The villagers could do nothing but watch as the fairy's song rang in the air and the cattle walked slowly and purposefully away from the farm. Every closed gate opened for them, every road remained empty for them, until at last they reached the meadow with the lake and disappeared beneath the crystal blue water once more. The fairy cows were never seen again. It is said that they dine by moonlight these days, but none have seen them. As for the farmer, well, the fairy did leave him one cow, one stray cow that did not come when called. It was the smallest cow in the herd, and this cow remained in the farmer's field as the villagers chattered and tuttered, sighed and sucked their teeth at what had just happened. The farmer put the remaining little white cow in the barn that night, and in the morning, when he went to milk it, he found the cow had turned black as soot. The milk was good, but never as good as the fairy cow's milk. But the farmer's herd grew, and the small black cows made the farmer enough to live out his days. I'd like to say he learnt his lesson, but it is said that he visited the field many more times, hoping to see the fairy and the bright white cows again. But those little black cows, they still graze in the fields of Wales today, and they are all descendants of the white fairy cows of that lake. Thanks for joining me around the hearth for this last episode of Stories from Lore. I'd like to thank you all for listening to the podcast for the last 5 years. It has been a wonderful journey to go on with you, and I hope you have enjoyed the stories and the lore I have shared along the way. I will be back with new ideas and perhaps a new podcast in the not too distant future, so make sure you are subscribed to my Substack newsletter to be the first to hear of new projects. Just hop over to the Substack site and search for Ceridwen's Cauldron, or use the link in the show notes. You can upgrade to paid for just £5 a month to access archived episodes, extras, and this season an exclusive monthly podcast for subscribers called The Story Forecast. I'll see you all again soon. Toodle pip. Goats. English goats, golden Guernsey goats, Bagot goats, Angora goats, British primitive goats, Old English goats, British Alpine, Anglo Nubian. Cows. Ancient cattle of Wales, Albion cows, dairy shorthorns, northern dairy shorthorns, native Aberdeen Angus, Whitebred shorthorn, Gloucester, Shetland, Irish moiled, traditional Hereford, the Chillingham wild cattle, Vaynol, Lincoln red originals, White Park, British white. Sheep. Torwen badgerface, Welsh mountain sheep, Lonk, Welsh mountain pedigree, white-faced Dartmoor, Borroray, Devon and Cornwall Longwool, Leicester Longwool, Lincoln Longwool, North Ronaldsay, white-faced Woodland, Border Leicester, Castle Milkmoret, Cotswold, Derbyshire Gritstone, Dorset Horn, Hill Radnor, Manx Lockton, Portland, Soy, Teeswater, Wensleydale, Balwyn, Devon Closewool, Dorset Down, Grey-faced Dartmoor, Oxford Down, Llanwenog, Norfolk Horn. Pigs. British Landrace, British Lop, Large Black, Middle White, Berkshire, Large White, Tamworth, British Saddleback, Gloucestershire Old Spots, Oxford Sandy and Black, Welsh. Horse. Dales Pony, Cleveland Bay Horse, Eriskay Pony, Hackney Horse and Pony, Suffolk Horse, Exmoor Pony, Dartmoor Pony, Clydesdale Horse, Fell Pony, Highland Pony, New Forest Pony, Shire Horse.